My name is Lynsey Nass. I am the production agronomist here at Southern Minnesota Beet Sugar, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys a bit about our agronomic practice database. All right, so for those of you who aren't super familiar with it, our agronomic practice database is where we collect data on the various agronomic practices that our growers are performing on their operations. And for those of you who've been participating in this, you know that over the last few years, we've been making pretty consistent changes to our questions being asked and our data collection methods. And the primary driver of that has been low participation in our database. So a few years ago, we were seeing as low as 25% participation on some of these questions. And we didn't really feel that that was representative of our entire co-op anymore. So in 2024, we decided to refocus on questions and data collection methods where we could get a larger sample and more representative data for the entire co-op. So in 2023, we first implemented the pesticide practice database. And this is a database that our agriculturists collect by calling up their growers and asking about the types of pesticides they're applying. So they ask, are they applying an in-furrow fungicide, or what does their CS program look like, or what kinds of post-herbicides they're using. And in 2024, we managed to get 75% participation on this. So that was a pretty big increase from some of the numbers we've been seeing in the past. And this information isn't collected on a field-by-field basis, so we can't tie it back to yield. A lot of this information is used internally, so we understand what you guys are doing out in your fields, and also we use it for defending products to various regulatory agencies. The next form of data collection we have is our contracting discussions. So when our agriculturists go out and do contracting with their growers, they ask a specific set of questions about the fields that they're contracting. And these primarily are pre-existing conditions of those fields. So things like what types of fall tillage were being performed, or has manure been applied within the previous 2 years. So they're things that can have a really big impact on your sugar beet crop, but they're also things that we can answer prior to planting. And because we ask these during contracting, we're able to get 100% participation on these. We've also been asking them for several years, so we're able to look at some more long-term sorts with these, and I'll go through some of those in a little bit. The last form of data that we collect is our planting information. And in 2024, we collected this information 2 different ways. So the first was through our LEAF program, which through the help of Jody Steffel, we are able to collect data directly from tractor data management systems for participating growers. So it collects their planting date and variety information. For those who don't have a compatible data management system, or for anyone who chooses not to participate, that information is supplemented by the agriculturists surveying their growers directly. And this year we were able to collect 70% of that information. So for the rest of my time, I'm going to be talking a bit about some of those contracting questions. So for each of them, I'm going to go through the 2024 information, and then I'm also going to look at either the 5 or 10-year sorts, depending on how long we've been asking these questions. So the first one we're going to talk about is lime applications. And the question that we ask is, has lime been applied to this field within the previous 2 years? And in 2024, 18% of acres said yes, a lime had been applied. And as you can see, that caused a pretty big bump in ESA for fields that had lime applied compared to those that did not. So there's a difference of over 1,600 pounds of extractable sugar per acre between fields that had lime applied versus those that did not. And that came out to just under $340 per acre in revenue difference between these fields. Now, when we're talking about revenue in this presentation, there are a couple of caveats. Firstly, that is based on the November initial payment letter for 2024. Secondly, that does not include any incentive payments. So this does not include the incentive payment that Cody was talking about earlier with the Climate Smart program. And thirdly, as we go through, you'll see that we're going to be looking at multiple years of data. And for those multiple years, we're just going to be using the 2024 payment calculator. And the reason that we're using the 2024 payment instead of the 2020 and 21 and so on is because we want to focus specifically on the advantage of the agronomic practice in question rather than other factors that are impacting our payments over these years, like factory performance and sugar price. So when we look at the 5-year data, you can see that in 2024, there was a larger advantage than usual for fields with lime applied. And this is likely due to the wet conditions that we had last year and the high instances of AF that we were seeing. But over 5 years, there is a consistent benefit towards applying lime versus fields that did not apply lime, with an average increase in ESA of 777 pounds. And again, based on the 2024 payment calculations, that comes out to about $140 per acre. The next topic we're going to look at is manure. So when we talk about manure, we're asking two different questions. The first is, has manure been applied to this field within the previous 2 years, and if so, what type? And the second question we ask is, when was the timing of that manure application? So was the manure applied the fall prior to the sugar beet crop or 2 falls prior? And in 2024, 23% of our acres had a manure application within the previous 2 years. And what I did for this graph here was combine all of those timings and all of the different types of manure and compared it to no manure being applied. And again, as you can see, there is a large advantage towards manure applications with an average increase of 1,645 pounds of extractable sugar per acre. And that comes out to just over $310 an acre in revenue difference. Now, when we look at the different timings, we don't really see a difference in ESA between fields that had manure applied the fall before versus 2 falls before. The difference that we do see is in how we get to that ESA number. So when we look at fields with manure applied the fall prior to the sugar beet planting, what we see is that the tons tend to increase, while the sugar and purity tend to dip a little bit compared to when manure is applied 2 falls prior to the sugar beet crop. So either way, you're ending up with very similar ESAs. It's just if you want to get there with tons or sugar. When we look at the 5-year, again, we see a consistent increase in ESA for fields with manure applied versus those without, with an average increase in 877 pounds per acre, or $158 an acre. Next topic we're going to look at is pattern tile. So as most of you know, pattern tile is a huge benefit to our sugar beet crop. And in 2024, given all of our wet conditions, there's certainly no exception to that. So in 2024, we had an average increase of 1,270 pounds of extractable sugar per acre for fields with pattern tile compared with those without. And that came out to $293 an acre in revenue. The 10-year data on this one also shows an increase in ESA that's pretty consistent over those 10 years, with the average being about 715 pounds of extractable sugar per acre, and that comes out to $156 an acre in revenue. And the other graph on here shows the percent of acres that have pattern tile. And what you can see with this is that from 2015 to 2019, we held pretty steady, right around 30% of our acres having pattern tile. And since then, we've seen a somewhat steady increase in that percent, and we're up to about 45% of our acres currently that are pattern tiled. And given the wet year we had last year and the dry fall, it's very likely that that number will continue to increase, but we're gonna be continuing to ask this question and all of these questions as we move forward in the coming years. The next topic I want to talk about is another 10-year graph. So this 10-year graph shows our spring cover crop percent of acres. So as you can see, 10 years ago, over 80% of our acres had a spring cover crop. And this past year, we were down to less than 55% of our acres with a spring cover crop. And I know that a big reason for that is our weed control issues and the fact that a lot of our weed control products aren't necessarily compatible with a spring cover crop. But I do just want to show that there is still a benefit to ESA when a spring cover crop is applied. So in 2024, we had a really windy spring, and we ended up with an average increase in ESA of 836 pounds per acre of extractable sugar, or $171 an acre. And again, we're looking at a consistent increase over the last 10 years for fields with a spring cover crop compared to those without, with an average increase of 542 pounds of extractable sugar per acre, or $128 an acre. Oh, too far. All right, so the last topic we're gonna go through is rotation length. And for this, I took the 3 most common rotations in our co-op, with 4-year rotations being the most common at 29%, 5 years being the second at 19%, and that's followed by 3-year rotations at 16%. And the 2024 data on this doesn't necessarily line up with the longer term data, but we're gonna go through it quick. So when we look at this, we see that the 3-year data ended up with, the 3-year rotation ended up with about a 300-pound decrease in ESA compared with the 4-year. And when we look at the 5-year, we see an even larger dip in ESA, and I don't really have a great explanation for this. My guess is that it is likely due to the fact that out east, where we had a lot of our spring heavy rainfalls, the 5-year rotation is a lot more common than the 3-year rotation, so geography could be playing into this a little bit. But when we look at the 10-year data, it's not necessarily as clear as some of our other graphs have been, but averaged over 10 years, there is no difference in ESA between a 4-year and a 5-year rotation. Between a 3-year and a 4-year, or a 3-year and a 5-year, there is a difference of 283 pounds of extractable sugar per acre, with the 4 and 5-year having a higher ESA. Now, the reason I want to talk to you guys about this is because I know we've been talking about increasing our acres, and an easy way to do that is to shorten your rotation length. Now, there doesn't seem to be, based on the database, a detriment to going from a 5-year rotation to a 4-year rotation. But to go from a 4 to a 3, there is a slight ding in ESA. Now, compared to a lot of these other practices we've looked at, that difference isn't huge. So that is certainly something that each of our growers have to decide on their operations, whether or not that is worth it to them to reduce their rotation, if that's how they would like to increase their acres. So the last thing we're going to be talking about is this Venn diagram. And this is a Venn diagram looking at the top 5% of fields, so roughly 45 fields from 2023. And they're the top 5% based on their ESA. And what it looks at is the various practices being implemented by that top 5%. So in 2023, of the top 5% seen in that large pink, light pink circle there, the majority of those fields had a 4-year rotation or longer. A good chunk of them also had pattern tile. A lot of them had lime, and a lot of them had a manure application within the previous 2 years. And the reason I want to show this is because it just goes to show that there isn't a single silver bullet that makes a field a top 5 field. It's a lot of these good management practices coming together to create a top 5 field. So with that, I just want to thank all of our growers for sharing their information with us. I want to thank the ag staff for collecting all of this data. And I want to thank Jody Steffel for working with our LEAF program on the planting information. Does anyone have any questions? Oh.
In that crop rotation, did it state what crops were in the rotation to squeeze that up a little bit?
No. So when we're looking at the rotation length, we're looking purely at the years in the rotation. It doesn't look at previous crop or which other crops are in that.
Very much, Lynsey.